The morning sun cast long shadows across the drought-stricken ranch as Martha Henderson stood by the fence, watching her last remaining horse graze on the sparse grass. Thunder, a magnificent bay stallion with a white blaze down his face, had been her companion for 8 years now. He was all she had left of the life she once knew, the life she had shared with her husband Samuel before the fever took him 2 winters ago. Martha's weathered hands gripped the fence post as she surveyed her land. What had once been a thriving ranch with dozens of cattle and horses was now reduced to barren fields and empty corrals. The drought had lasted 3 years, longer than anyone could remember. The cattle had been sold off one by one just to pay for food and medicine. Her neighbors had long since abandoned their homesteads, heading east to find work in the cities or west to try their luck in California. But Martha had stayed. This land held too many memories, too much of Samuel's sweat and dreams to simply walk away. Every fence post he had driven into the hard ground, every barn board he had carefully placed, every tree they had planted together in hopes of creating shade for future generations. She couldn't leave, even as the bank notices piled up on her kitchen table and the pantry grew increasingly bare. Thunder lifted his head and nickered softly, as if sensing her troubled thoughts. The horse had an uncanny ability to read her moods, often approaching when she needed comfort most. Samuel used to joke that Thunder was part dog, the way he seemed to understand human emotions. The stallion had been Samuel's pride and joy, bred from the finest stock they could afford in better times. As Martha walked toward the house, she noticed a figure approaching on the horizon. In this desolate country, visitors were rare, and often brought either very good news or very bad news. She shaded her eyes against the morning glare and watched as the figure slowly took shape. It was a man on foot, moving with an unsteady gait that suggested exhaustion or injury. The stranger was clearly Apache, his long black hair hanging loose around his shoulders, his clothes a mixture of traditional and white man's clothing that had seen better days. As he drew closer, Martha could see he was young, perhaps in his 20s, but his face was etched with pain and fatigue. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the fence post where she had been standing moments before. Martha felt her heart racing. Relations between the white settlers and the Apache had been tense for years, though there had been relative peace in this region recently. Still, a woman alone on an isolated ranch had reason to be cautious. She reached for the rifle that Samuel had always insisted she keep by the door. But something in the young man's posture stopped her. He wasn't moving like a threat. He was moving like someone who was dying. The Apache looked up at her with dark eyes that held both desperation and dignity. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, suggesting he had learned it well from missionaries or traders. "Please, woman," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My horse. She fall in canyon. 3 days I walk. Need horse to reach my people. My sister. She have baby coming, but baby not come right. She need medicine. Woman from our village, but village is 2 days' ride." Martha studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a brother's desperation and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from walking for days without adequate food or water. His lips were cracked, his face sunburned, and there were bloodstains on his moccasins that suggested his feet were badly worn. "Your sister is having trouble with childbirth?" Martha asked, her motherly instincts overriding her caution. She had never been blessed with children of her own, but she had helped deliver enough babies in the community to understand the urgency of such situations. The young man nodded vigorously. "Baby come too early, and wrong way. Only old medicine woman know how to help, but she live far from where we camp now. Need fast horse, or sister and baby both die." Martha's eyes drifted to Thunder, who had wandered closer, and was now regarding the stranger with curious but calm attention. The horse had always been a good judge of character, and he showed no signs of agitation around the Apache. "I have 1 horse," Martha said slowly, "but he's all I have left. If I give him to you, how do I know you'll bring him back?" The young man reached into a leather pouch at his waist and pulled out what appeared to be a carved piece of turquoise in the shape of a thunderbird. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of a master artisan. "This belonged to my grandfather's grandfather," he said, offering it to her. "Worth many horses. I give as promise. When my sister is safe, I bring back your horse and this stays yours." Martha took the carved piece and examined it. Even her untrained eye could see it was valuable, both in terms of craftsmanship and the obvious spiritual significance it held for the young man. The fact that he was willing to part with such an heirloom spoke to his desperation, but it wasn't the turquoise that convinced her. It was the memory of Samuel's voice, echoing in her mind from a conversation they'd had years ago. "Martha," he had said, "a person's character isn't measured by what they do when it's easy. It's measured by what they do when it costs them everything." "Aft, what's your name?" she asked. "I am called Running Wolf," he replied. "Well, Running Wolf, my name is Martha Henderson. That horse's name is Thunder. And he's been my faithful companion for 8 years. He's all I have left in this world that matters. But a woman in childbirth and her baby matter more." She walked toward Thunder, who approached willingly as she took hold of his lead rope. The horse nuzzled her shoulder as she led him toward Running Wolf, and Martha felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She was not just giving up a horse. She was giving up her last connection to Samuel, her last hope of survival if things got worse, her last friend in an increasingly lonely world. "Thunder is strong and fast," she told Running Wolf as she handed over the lead rope. "But he's also gentle and smart. Talk to him while you ride, and he'll give you everything he has. There's a stream about 5 miles north where you can water him, and he knows the way to the trading post if you get lost." Running Wolf took the rope with hands that trembled slightly, whether from exhaustion or emotion. Martha couldn't tell. "I will care for him as if he were my own brother," he promised, "and I will return him to you when my sister is safe." "Your sister and her baby are in my prayers," Martha said, stepping back as Running Wolf swung himself onto Thunder's back with surprising grace, despite his obvious exhaustion. The young Apache looked down at her from Thunder's back, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he placed his hand over his heart and said something in his native language that Martha didn't understand but felt in her soul was a blessing. "Thank you, Martha Henderson," he said in English. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." With that, he pressed his heels gently into Thunder's sides, and the stallion broke into a smooth canter, carrying his new rider toward the distant mountains where Running Wolf's people waited. Martha watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer on the horizon, then stood alone in her dusty yard, feeling more isolated than she had since Samuel's death. She looked down at the turquoise Thunderbird in her palm, its intricate details catching the sunlight. Whatever happened now, she had done what felt right. Samuel would have approved. She knew, but as she walked back toward her empty house, the silence seemed to press down on her like a physical weight. That evening, as Martha sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats that wouldn't come. Thunder's empty stall seemed to mock her from across the yard, and she wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. But somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening wind, she thought she heard the faint sound of drums from the Apache camp, and she chose to believe they were drums of celebration, announcing the safe arrival of a new baby into the world. 3 days passed without word from Running Wolf, and Martha found herself caught between hope and growing despair. She had made peace with her decision to help the desperate Apache, but the practical reality of her situation was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Without Thunder, she had no way to reach town for supplies, no way to get help if she became ill or injured, and no way to escape if the situation became dangerous. The drought showed no signs of breaking. Each morning, Martha would walk to her small vegetable garden behind the house, hoping to find some sign of life among the withered plants, but the soil remained cracked and barren. Her well was running dangerously low, and she had begun rationing water, allowing herself only what was absolutely necessary for drinking and cooking. On the 4th morning, Martha was surprised to see a dust cloud approaching from the east. As it drew closer, she could make out a wagon being pulled by 2 tired-looking mules. The driver was old Pete Morrison, who ran the general store in Millfield, the closest thing to a town within 50 miles. Pete pulled up in front of her house and climbed down from his wagon with the careful movements of a man whose joints had begun to protest such activities. He had been making supply runs to the scattered homesteads for more than 20 years, and Martha had always been grateful for his visits, even though she rarely had money to buy much. "Mornin', Martha," Pete called out, tipping his worn hat. "Brought some supplies I thought you might need." Martha approached the wagon cautiously. "Pete, you know I can't afford much right now. Things have been difficult since Samuel passed." Pete nodded sympathetically. "I know, Martha. I know. But I'm not here to collect money today. Got word in town that you might be needing some help." "Word from who?" Martha asked, puzzled. "Funny thing," Pete said, beginning to unload boxes from his wagon. "Day before yesterday, an Apache fellow showed up at the trading post. Young man, riding a fine bay stallion. He was asking about you specifically. Wanted to know if anyone knew Martha Henderson who lived on the old Henderson ranch." Martha's heart skipped a beat. "Running Wolf? Didn't give his name," Pete continued. "But he left these supplies and enough money to cover them, plus a little extra. Said to tell you that his sister's baby arrived safely. A healthy boy. And that Thunder had run like the wind itself." Pete continued unloading the wagon, revealing bags of flour, coffee, sugar, salt, pork, beans, and other essentials that Martha hadn't been able to afford in months. There were also items she hadn't expected. A warm blanket, a new pair of boots that looked to be about her size, and even some peppermint candy that she recognized as being particularly expensive. "There's more," Pete said, reaching into his vest pocket. "The Apache fellow left this for you." He handed her a small leather pouch, and when Martha opened it, she found the turquoise Thunderbird she had given to Running Wolf, along with several silver coins and a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, Martha unfolded the paper. The writing was careful and precise, clearly the work of someone who had learned English as a second language, but took great care with it. "Mrs. Henderson," the letter read, "my sister Little Dove and her son are well. The medicine woman arrived in time because of Thunder's speed. Your horse is strong and wise, and he saved 2 lives. I return what I promised, but cannot return Thunder yet. He injured his leg on the hard ride and needs time to heal. I give my word he will be returned when he is strong. Your kindness has made you family to my people. Running Wolf." Martha felt a mixture of relief and continued worry. Thunder was alive, and the mission had been successful, but she was still without her horse. Pete seemed to sense her conflicted emotions. "Martha," he said gently, "I've been thinking about your situation here. This drought can't last forever, but until it breaks, folks like you are going to need help. What would you say to coming into town for a while? Sarah Morrison's been looking for someone to help in the store, and we could use someone with your skills." Martha looked around at her empty ranch, at the memories that seemed to cling to every post and board. The practical part of her mind knew that Pete's offer made sense, but her heart rebelled against the idea of abandoning the home she had built with Samuel. "I appreciate the offer, Pete. Truly I do. But this is my home. Samuel and I put our lives into this land, and I can't just walk away from it." Pete nodded understandingly. "I figured you'd say that. Sarah did too. She said you were too stubborn for your own good. But that's part of what makes you special." Over the next several days, Martha found herself settling into a strange routine. With the supplies Running Wolf had left, she was more comfortable than she had been in months, but the absence of Thunder made every day feel incomplete. She found herself constantly listening for the sound of hoofbeats, jumping at every distant sound that might signal his return. A week later, she was hanging laundry on the line behind her house when she heard horses approaching. But this time, it wasn't just one horse. The sound was different, deeper, suggesting multiple animals moving together. Martha walked around to the front of her house and stopped in amazement. Approaching her ranch was a sight she had never seen before. A group of Apache riders leading a small herd of horses. At the front of the group, she could see Running Wolf, and her heart leaped as she recognized Thunder's distinctive white blaze. But Thunder wasn't alone. Running Wolf was leading not just her bay stallion, but also a beautiful paint mare with a colt at her side, a sturdy-looking buckskin gelding, and two other horses that Martha didn't recognize but that were clearly fine animals. As the group approached, Martha could see that Thunder was favoring his right front leg slightly, confirming the injury mentioned in Running Wolf's letter. But he looked alert and healthy otherwise. When he saw her, the stallion whinnied in recognition and pulled slightly against the lead rope, eager to reach his mistress. Running Wolf dismounted and approached Martha with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. Behind him, several other Apache men and women remained on horseback, watching the proceedings with interest. "Mrs. Henderson," Running Wolf said, "I have come to return Thunder, as promised." "His leg?" Martha asked, concern evident in her voice. "Healing well," Running Wolf assured her. "Medicine woman treated him same as she treated my sister. He will be strong again, but should not work hard for few more weeks." Martha nodded, but her attention was drawn to the other horses. "Running Wolf, I only gave you one horse. Why have you brought so many?" Running Wolf's expression became serious. "You gave me much more than horse, Mrs. Henderson. You gave life to my sister and her son. You gave trust to stranger. When you had reason for fear, you gave your most precious thing to help people you never met." He gestured toward the other Apache. "My people, we talk about what you did. Many say white woman who would give her last horse to save Apache lives is not ordinary woman. My grandfather, he is chief of our band. He say debt like this cannot be paid with just returning one horse." An elderly Apache man rode forward, his bearing suggesting great dignity and authority. His face was weathered by decades in the sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He spoke in Apache to Running Wolf, who nodded and translated. "My grandfather says you have shown that not all white people see Apache as enemies. He says kindness like yours deserves kindness in return, many times over." The old chief dismounted and approached Martha directly. When he spoke in English, his voice was deep and resonant, with an accent that spoke of many years, but also of wisdom carefully acquired. "Martha Henderson," he said, "I am called Gray Eagle. My grandson has told me of your sacrifice. Among my people, such generosity creates bond that cannot be broken. These horses are gift from our herd to yours." Martha looked at the magnificent animals, then back at Gray Eagle. "I can't accept such a generous gift. I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment." Gray Eagle smiled, the expression creasing his weathered face. "That is exactly why you deserve gift. Person who helps expecting nothing is person who should receive everything." Running Wolf stepped forward again. "Mrs. Henderson, there is more. My people, we know this land well. We know where grass still grows even in drought, where water runs underground, where game comes to drink. If you allow, we share this knowledge, help you make ranch strong again." Martha felt overwhelmed by the generosity being offered. She looked at Thunder, who had managed to work his way closer to her, and was now nuzzling her shoulder in his familiar way. Then she looked at the other horses, at Running Wolf, at Gray Eagle, and at the faces of the Apache people, who had ridden so far just to honor what they saw as a debt. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Gray Eagle replied simply. "Say yes to friendship between peoples who should be friends. Say yes to help when help is offered freely. Say yes to hope when hope comes riding with thunder of many horses." As if summoned by his words, a rumble of actual thunder rolled across the sky, and Martha looked up to see the first clouds she had seen in weeks gathering on the horizon. The drought, it seemed, might finally be ready to break. Martha stood in stunned silence as the first raindrops began to fall, each one striking the parched earth with a soft patter that sounded like applause. The Apache people around her began to smile and speak quietly among themselves in their own language, and she could sense their joy at the approaching storm. "This is good sign," Gray Eagle said, extending his weathered hand to catch the falling rain. "Water comes when friendship is made. My people believe such things are connected." Over the next hour, As a steady rain began to fall for the first time in months, the Apache helped Martha lead the new horses to her corrals. Thunder seemed delighted to be home, despite his slight limp, and he immediately went to his favorite spot near the water trough. The other horses settled in quickly, as if they had always belonged there. Running Wolf introduced Martha to each animal. The paint mare was called Starwalker, and her colt was barely 3 months old but already showing signs of becoming a magnificent horse. The buckskin gelding was named Steady Wind, known for his calm temperament and sure footing on difficult terrain. The other 2 horses were a chestnut mare called Fire Blossom and a young stallion named Mountain Shadow. These horses have been chosen carefully, Running Wolf explained as they watched the animals explore their new home. Starwalker is good, Mother. We'll teach her colt and any future colts how to be strong. Steady Wind is good for riding long distances, very reliable. Fire Blossom is fastest runner in our herd, and Mountain Shadow is strong for heavy work. As the day progressed, Gray Eagle and several of the Apache women began sharing their knowledge of the land with Martha. They showed her places on her own property where she had never thought to look for water, pointing out subtle signs in the landscape that indicated underground streams. They identified plants that could survive drought conditions and provide food for both humans and horses. One of the Apache women, introduced as Singing Bird, spoke excellent English and seemed particularly knowledgeable about agriculture. She examined Martha's failed vegetable garden with a thoughtful expression. "Ground here is good," Singing Bird said, "but you plant wrong time and wrong way for this climate. Apache women, we know how to grow food even when rain is scarce. I teach you. If you want to learn." Martha found herself nodding eagerly. "I would be very grateful for any knowledge you could share." As evening approached, Gray Eagle announced that his people would camp nearby for the night and continue their journey the next day. But Running Wolf asked if he could speak with Martha privately. They walked toward the fence where she had first seen him approaching days earlier, and Running Wolf turned to face her with an expression of serious contemplation. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, "my grandfather and we have talked much about your situation here. You are alone on this ranch, with much work that is difficult for one person. My people, we move with seasons, follow game and grass. But some of our young men, they think maybe time has come to learn new ways, as well as keeping old ways." Martha waited, sensing that Running Wolf was working up to something important. "I have brother," he continued, "younger than me, called Swift River. He is good with horses, good with land, but he wants to learn more about farming like white men do. What if he comes to work on your ranch? You teach him farming ways. He helps with work that is too hard for you alone. My people camp not far from here in winter months. Would be good arrangement for everyone." The proposal surprised Martha, but as she considered it, she realized it made perfect sense. The ranch was indeed too much work for one person, and she had been struggling with tasks that Samuel had always handled. Having help, especially from someone who understood horses and land management, would make an enormous difference. "What does Swift River think about this idea?" she asked. "He is here tonight," Running Wolf said with a smile. "He hopes you will say yes." That evening, as the Apache made camp near Martha's ranch, she was introduced to Swift River. He was younger than Running Wolf, perhaps 19 or 20 years old, with an eager expression and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His English was not as fluent as his brother's, but he communicated well enough to make his enthusiasm for the proposal clear. "I learn good from you," he said earnestly. "I work hard. Help make ranch strong again. Brother, tell me you are good person. Fair person. I want to learn white man's farming, but also share Apache ways that work on this land." Martha found herself warming to the young man immediately. There was something about his genuine desire to learn and his obvious respect for the land that reminded her of Samuel at that age, full of dreams and determination. "We could try it for a season," she said finally. "See how we work together. If it goes well, we can talk about making it a permanent arrangement." Swift River's face broke into a broad grin, and he spoke rapidly in Apache to his brother and grandfather. Gray Eagle nodded approvingly, and said something that made all the Apache present laugh and clap. "What did he say?" Martha asked. Running Wolf translated, still smiling. "He said that when spirits want to fix something broken, they send exactly the right people at exactly the right time." The next morning dawned clear and fresh, with the smell of rain-washed earth filling the air. As the Apache prepared to continue their journey, Martha found herself surrounded by new friends, saying goodbye, but with the promise of Swift River's return in a few days with his belongings and a few horses of his own. Gray Eagle approached her one final time before mounting his horse. "Martha Henderson," he said formally, "you are now sister to Apache people. If you ever need help, send word. If we ever need help, we know we can come to you. This is bond that will last beyond our lifetimes. Pass to our children and their children." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a beautifully beaded bridle, clearly made by expert hands. "For Thunder," he said simply. "So all who see him know he carries woman of honor." As the Apache band rode away, Martha stood in her yard, surrounded by her new horses, holding the magnificent bridle, and feeling more hopeful than she had since Samuel's death. Thunder limped over to her and pressed his nose against her shoulder, as if to reassure her that despite all the changes, some things remained constant. Over the following weeks, Swift River proved to be everything Running Wolf had promised. He was a tireless worker, eager to learn new techniques while sharing Apache knowledge that often proved superior to the methods Martha had been using. Together, they began implementing water conservation techniques that the Apache had developed over generations, and they planted crops using traditional Apache methods that were better suited to the climate. The rain that had begun on the day of the horse gift continued intermittently throughout the following weeks, slowly breaking the drought that had gripped the region for so long. Martha's ranch began to show signs of life again, with green shoots appearing in previously barren areas. 3 months later, when Running Wolf returned for a visit, he found the ranch transformed. The horses were thriving, the crops were growing well, and Martha looked healthier and happier than she had since before her husband's death. "You have done well, brother," Running Wolf said to Swift River as they watched Martha working in her garden, now lush with vegetables and herbs. "Mrs. Henderson is good teacher," Swift River replied, "and she is becoming like Apache woman in her knowledge of the land." But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Martha herself. The lonely, desperate widow, who had given away her last horse, had become the center of a small but thriving community. Apache families would often stop by the ranch during their travels, sharing news and trading goods. Pete Morrison's visits became more frequent as well, as Martha's ranch became known as a reliable stopping point for travelers. Word of the unusual partnership between the White Widow and the Apache worker spread throughout the region, and while some neighbors disapproved, others began to see the wisdom in it. Several other struggling homesteaders reached out to Gray Eagle's band, seeking similar arrangements. On the first anniversary of the day she had given Thunder to Running Wolf, Martha stood in the same spot by the fence where she had first seen the desperate young Apache approaching. But now, instead of looking out at barren land with a single horse, she surveyed thriving pastures where dozens of horses grazed contentedly. Thunder had fully recovered from his injury, and was now the proud father of Star Walker's second foal. Swift River had proven so valuable that Martha had made him a full partner in the ranch, and they were planning to expand their horse breeding program. But most importantly, Martha was no longer alone. She had found family where she least expected it, and had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the hardest sacrifices. As she watched the horses moving across the pasture in the golden light of evening, Thunder lifted his head and whinnied, as if calling to her. She smiled and walked toward him, the beaded bridle that Gray Eagle had given her catching the last rays of sunlight. In the distance, she could hear the sound of drums from the Apache camp that had been set up nearby for the winter. And she knew that when Running Wolf brought his new wife to visit next week, there would be celebrating that would last long into the night. The drought was over. But more importantly, so was Martha's isolation. She had given up her last horse to save strangers, and in return, she had received not just a herd of horses, but a new understanding of what family could mean. And in the years that followed, whenever children asked about the magnificent horses that ran free across Martha Henderson's ranch, they were told the story of a widow who gave everything she had to help people she had never met, and how that act of kindness returned to her multiplied beyond anything she could have imagined. The thundering hooves of those Mustangs became a sound that echoed across the prairie for generations, carrying with them the message that true wealth comes not from what we keep, but from what we give freely when giving costs us everything.